my hair is really standing up, isn't it? Okay, so what do a parent, a partner, a pet, and a profession have in common? Answer is, they're all things that you can grieve. So what is grief anyway? We hear that word all the time, but do we really know what it means? So basically, grief is just an emotional suffering that you experience when something or someone that you love is taken away. And sometimes that is a parent, and sometimes it's a partner, sometimes it's a pet, sometimes it's a profession, like if you lost your job. Some of the more common things that people grieve are like a divorce or a relationship, their health, or the health of someone that they love, including a pet, the loss of a job, loss of financial stability, a miscarriage, retirement, death of a pet, loss of a dream or something that, you know, like what could have been, safety after a trauma of some kind, like if you're in a car accident or something, loss of a friendship, and sometimes loss of the family home, like if your parents die and you have to sell the home that you grew up in, sometimes that brings on some grief, not just because your parents aren't around, but just selling that memory. There's a lot of myths around grief, and especially in today's society when you're expected to get over it in 3 days and go back to work, or 7 days if it's a close relative. That doesn't happen. This society has a long way to go before they recognize grief and bereavement, because there's no timetable saying when you should be over something. A lot of people believe that, you know, the pain will go away faster if you ignore it. Wrong. It won't. It'll only make it worse in the long run. You might be able to put it aside and not deal with it, but that doesn't mean it makes it go away. Another myth is that it's important to be strong for everyone else in the face of this tragedy. Wrong. Feeling sad or frightened and all that is normal. It's a normal reaction to loss. So crying doesn't mean you're weak, and you don't have to be strong for the family. You don't have to protect anybody. Sometimes if you show your true emotions, you can actually help your family by them recognizing that it's okay for them to show their emotions. There's another myth that if you don't cry, it means you aren't sorry for the loss of whatever it is. Wrong. Crying is normal, but not everybody cries. And just because you don't cry doesn't mean that you're grieving wrong. You have another way to show it. I'm not going to go into all the ways. Another myth about grief is that grieving should last about a year and then you should be over it. Wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. There's no time frame for grieving. None. Everybody takes a different amount of time, and it's a process. It's not an event. And it happens over months or years. Debilitating grief where you're absolutely just devastated and you can't do anything, that might be a problem. But generally speaking, it differs from person to person. Some of the ways that you can deal with grief is like acknowledge your pain. Don't just stuff it down and try to drink it away or eat it away or sleep it away. Acknowledge it and accept that grief can trigger a lot of different things, and a lot of them are unexpected. It's like it might bring up something from childhood or other things. So understand that grief is a process that you have to go through, and it's unique to you. One of the best things you can do is seek out like face-to-face support from people that you care about or that care about you, or a therapist. And then recognize the difference between grief and depression, because yeah, there's depression in grief. That's just part of the deal. But then if it continues into this deep, dark place and you just can't seem to get over it, then you might have something a little more complex than, I don't want to say your average run-of-the-mill grief, but you know what I'm talking about. Yes, it's really windy today. It blew my little goofy hat off, so. In 1969, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross developed what I'm sure you've heard of as the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And that is something that she developed after working with terminally ill people for many years, and that was pretty much what she recognized as being a pattern. But that doesn't mean that everybody goes through that, and that's not like steps that you go through and then you're done. It's typical responses from people when they're experiencing grief. The first one, you know, the denial part is sometimes that happens for people when they just can't believe that whatever situation it is has happened. whether they've lost their job or lost their home or lost their dog or lost their husband or their wife or their parent or whatever. They're just like, I can't believe that happened, especially when it's a sudden thing. And then there's anger, and a lot of people get that one confused because they think, why would I be angry at the person who died? And some people are, like in cases of like suicide or overdose or whatever, or just generally they might be angry at the person who died. But then again, it doesn't have to be anger at the person who died. It could just be general anger, like you're just frustrated and just annoyed with everything, and it has nothing really to do with being mad at the person or the animal or the thing or whatever happened. And it can be anger at God, and it's okay to be angry at God. Let's get that on the table right now. If you're God-fearing and you believe in God and you believe in creation and all that stuff, it's perfectly fine to be mad at God. He can handle it. Tell him off if you want to. He can handle it. He allows things to happen. He doesn't make them happen. So I'm not going to get into that. So another one of the steps that she came up with was bargaining, which some people, that usually happens in situations like somebody's in the hospital, and so they make this deal with God. You know, if you get this person better, if you make my dog better, if you don't let me lose my job or whatever, then I will do X, Y, Z. You know, I'll be a better person, I'll help more people, I'll do whatever. And then there's depression that follows after the realization that all these other things are happening or haven't happened. And you get into this like, I don't care. Too bad, so sad, sucks to be you. I'm in depression mode. And then there's the acceptance part that a lot of people work through, get to. Like you've accepted it, you're at peace with what happened, you might not like it. There's not a lot you can do about it, but you recognize that it's happened, and now you gotta live with the new normal. You don't have to go through each of these stages. Some people will never experience some of the steps, and some people will hit all of them. Some people go through this one, and then go back to this one, and then go back, experience a lot of them at the same time. But that's okay. Like I said, grief is a very individual process, and you deal with it the way that you deal with it. Hopefully that it's not a self-destructive thing, that like numbing out like drinking or doing drugs or something that's going to harm yourself, but deal with it the way you deal with it. The emotional symptoms of grief include like shock and disbelief. Like right now, you're just numb that it's happened, and you're just like getting through the motions, like planning the funeral or finding another house or another job or whatever it was your loss was. Then there's the sadness, that profound sadness that hits, and that's the typical symptom of grief. Emptiness and despair and yearning for the one that's lost or the thing that's lost. Sometimes you cry a lot and you feel emotionally unstable. That's normal. Sometimes you have guilt and regret about things that you said or you didn't say, or things that you did or didn't do, especially when it's a long-term illness kind of a situation. It's like, well, maybe if I'd done that better, or if I'd done that more. Sometimes religious people tend to think, maybe if I pray harder, or maybe if I'd, been more faithful, then this person wouldn't have died, or that animal wouldn't have died, or whatever. A lot of fear is another common thing with grief, because a significant loss can trigger a host of worries and fears, especially if you've lost your job or your spouse or your home or something, because then you have that instability to go along with the grief, and that really doesn't help. Anger is another big one because, like I said before, you could be really resentful at the person that died, or at God, or at yourself, or at the doctors, or maybe if there was a car accident, at the other person that caused it. And sometimes when we hit that anger, sometimes we're looking for somebody to blame, and sometimes there's nobody to blame. Sometimes it just is, as painful as that is. There's also physical symptoms to grief that people really don't think about a lot, but fatigue and nausea, and your immunity gets lowered because your body is just on, survival mode, and it's all stressed out. You can lose weight, you can gain weight, you can have aches and pains and insomnia. It's a joy and a pleasure, but it's part of grief. But then there's also anticipatory grief, and that one is like if you have a family member or a pet or something that's aging or terminally ill or something, or even a retirement. If you know retirement is coming, you can start grieving before it actually happens, because you know that something's coming, but there's nothing you can do about it. I've heard it said that death, in anticipatory grief, death is like giving birth. It's like pregnancy, because you know you're going to have a baby, but you just don't know exactly when. Same with death. It's like you know it's coming, but you're just not exactly sure when. Then there's also disenfranchised grief, and that one can happen when whatever it is that you've lost or that you're grieving is marginalized by someone or someone else or an institution of some sort. Like if you've lost a pet, a lot of times people go, it was just a dog or it was just a cat. No, it was a family member to that person who lost it, and that family member deserves respect, and that grief is real for that person. That grief is real. It's the same experience as if they lost a person or someone else. It's still grief. Your body is still going through the same thing. Your mind and your heart still going through the same thing. Yes, there's different levels of intensity of grief. You know, there's no comparing, but some people will compare like, well, it's not as important as a person. It's like, well, maybe it is to that person. Some of the more common ones for disenfranchised grief are pets and miscarriages, especially for men. Men often get overlooked when it comes to a miscarriage. Yes, the woman suffered the miscarriage, but the men also grieve, and a lot of times they're overlooked when it comes to grief for something like that. And then there's also when people lose somebody to suicide. When it comes to suicide, it's the taboo topic and nobody wants to talk about it. And you know what? It doesn't matter how the person died. The fact is that they're gone and someone is grieving that loss. That is the point. That thing is gone and that person is grieving. That's what should matter, not how they died, or you know what I mean? So, and that's similar to like a drug overdose or something. People will go, oh, well, they did that. They knew what was coming. They deserved it. No, that person is gone. And that other person is grieving now. And it doesn't matter how they died, it's the fact that they're gone. And then there's complicated grief. That's when you get stuck in this perpetual state of bereavement. It's like everything's gone and you're constantly searching for that person and you cannot move on with your life. It's just like you're stuck. It's unresolved grief, and that will really cause problems if you don't deal with it. So that's when you really, really need to look for some support from like either a grief support group or from a therapist or from your ecclesiastical leader of some sort, or friends and family are always important in supporting you during grief. But if you've hit complex grief or complicated grief and you cannot move forward with your life and you're just stuck, you really need some professional help. Another thing that really causes problems sometimes with people that are grieving is when other people feel awkward when they try to comfort you and then they say something stupid. They don't mean to say things that are stupid, or they don't mean to say things that are offensive, but they just don't know what to say. Sometimes they'll say, well, at least he's in a better place, or at least he's not suffering anymore, or, wow, you look really good even though that so-and-so's dead. It's like, no, yeah, you're going to be in a state of too bad, so sad, sucks to be you, and I'm just mad at everything. And if somebody says something like that, you're going to be probably not receive it well. But try to keep in mind, if you can, try to keep in mind that they're just doing the best they can and they don't know what they don't know what to say. People don't know what to say. And you know what the trick is for all of us who don't know what to say? Don't say anything. Just be. Just let them talk. Just listen. Just be with that person and say, I don't know what to say, but I'm here if you want to talk. And don't just leave it at, hey, give me a call if you want to talk, or hey, give me a call if you need something, because they're not going to call. You know they're not going to call. So be proactive, but don't be pushy. Don't get in their face, because people need time, privacy to grieve. But also, after about 3-4 months, that loss becomes very real. When that person realizes, hey, I can't just pick up the phone and call so-and-so, that becomes very real. And that's usually about the time people start to drop off the radar and stop contacting that person. And the grief is just as real, if not more so, at that time, because then they're really realizing, this is for real. So be sure, if you're going to be a support person to somebody, for any kind of loss, not just a person loss, but even a pet or a job or whatever, if you're going to be a support person and be there for them for the long haul, not just for the first few weeks after the funeral or whatever. So if you're religious, draw comfort from your faith, because a lot of faith traditions have some beautiful mourning rituals that will help as you process your loss. Join a support group, a grief support group. If you don't want to do therapy right away, join a grief support group, because there's tons of them online even. Be careful with the ones that you join, that you're not going to get dragged down into some, deeper hole, grieving for someone else's grief and just make everything so much worse. And again, like I said, talk to a therapist or a grief counselor, because it really does help. And it doesn't have to be like, Frasier or anything like that when you're laying on the couch talking for 3.5 years about something, but it might be, but it doesn't have to be that way. A grief counselor can help, therapist can help. Taking care of yourself is really important during the grief process, because your body is worn out. It might not be physically worn out, but your mental and emotional state will be just fried. So be kind to yourself, face your feelings, deal with your feelings, write them down, go through the journaling process, because if it's a journal, you can write anything you want, nobody's going to read it. If you don't face it now and you stuff it down, it's going to come out in another way later on down the line, and it's probably not going to be healthy. Express yourself in ways that are meaningful to you, like journaling, art, gardening. Sometimes working in the soil is a good way for people to get back to, processing that grief. Try to maintain interest in your hobbies and other interests. Like if you'd like to go hiking, like I do, go hiking. Do something that gets you back out, and don't let anybody tell you how you need to feel, because, and don't tell yourself how to feel either. I should be over this. No, who said? Who said you should be over this? If you're still having trouble, you're still having trouble. Go through the process that you need to deal with it without stuffing it down. There's no time limit, like I said, and it's okay to laugh, it's okay to have joy, it's okay to have moments of pleasure. That doesn't mean you've forgotten the person or the animal or the whatever it is that you lost. It doesn't mean that that's gone away. It just means that you're starting to accept the loss. Look after your physical health, because like I said, your immunity gets lowered when you're going through this grief process, and you can catch bugs without even trying. So that's really important to combat the fatigue with proper amount of sleep, proper amount of rest, which is different than sleep, and proper nutrition and exercise to the best of your ability, because all those things will help. If you're feeling better physically, or at least trying to maintain yourself physically, you can process the mental and emotional part of it better. And then be prepared for the anniversaries, the firsts. The firsts are never fun. The anniversaries, the holidays, the birthdays, all those milestones and stuff. The first ones suck, rocks. So be prepared ahead of time and plan something that is going to be either a pleasant activity or some way to memorialize that person or that animal or that thing or whatever in a way that will be meaningful to you, that will help you process, and it's okay to have the waves, because grief comes in waves. At first it's like a big shipwreck, and all of a sudden, you go down and you're just clinging to anything to stay afloat. And then after a while, the tide comes and goes, and you might think you're over it, and then the tide comes in again and takes you out with it a little ways, and then eventually you get spit back on shore, and you're okay for a while, and here comes the tide again for some reason. You don't have to know why. You don't have to figure out, oh, well, maybe it's because I did. It doesn't matter. Why does not matter. The point is you're feeling it, so let yourself feel it. That's probably the biggest way to get over it, and talking about it with somebody. Friend, family, therapist, doesn't matter. Talk to somebody about it, because talking about it gets it out of your head and processes it. And that is one of the healthiest things you can do too. So anyway, hopefully you were able to get something out of that. I know grief is never a pleasant topic to talk about, but it's something that needs to be talked about. And if that's one thing Lion King taught us, it's like the circle of life, right? So if you are going through grief right now, or if you've lost someone or something that was meaningful to you and you haven't been able to process it in a healthy way, make sure you either talk to your doctor or find a therapist, because one of the best ways to get over this, or I don't say get over, but to get through this, is to talk about it. Because grief isn't something that you necessarily get over, it's something that you get through, and you come out on the other side with a new normal. And a new normal isn't always pleasant, but it's the new normal. So learning how to deal with that in a healthy way will go a long ways better than stuffing it down. So thanks for hanging out with me today, and I'll see you later.